and welcome back to the American National Cattlewomen's Podcast, calling all cattle women. I'm your host for this episode, Leanna Spratling. Today with me, I have Kathy Simmons, who's the Chief Veterinarian at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Leanna. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to answer some of your questions on diseases of concern for cattle producers and biosecurity on cattle operations.
So let's go. This is definitely a really big subject that we're going to be talking about, but I want to kind of start with you, how you ended up where you are today and kind of your history.
Well, happy to say a little bit about myself for the audience. I am originally from Virginia. I went to undergraduate at Virginia Tech and was in the first class at the veterinary school at Virginia, Maryland, there in Blacksburg. Went on to be in private practice for a little over 27 years, and then did an AVMA, American Association for Veterinary Medicine, fellowship at Congressional Fellowship, and I did that in the office of Senator Olympia Snowe from Maine. And I did a lot of human health issues. That was back in 2011 after Affordable Care passed. So we were quite busy on the human health front during that time. And then applied at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association after the senator chose not to run for re-election, and have been at NCBA as the chief veterinarian now for 13 years and enjoy the work I do. My family raised beef cattle, so it's not something that I was not aware of the concerns of producers.
Well, that is wonderful. So I want to dive right into New World Screwworm. That's kind of the main thing that we are facing today. And just for reference for the audience, since this is something that's changing literally hour by hour and day by day, this episode was recorded on July 23rd. So just to keep that as a reference. So I'm just going to let you dive right on in.
Well, New World Screwworm is a foreign animal disease. We eradicated it in the United States in 1966, and our neighbors in Mexico eradicated it in 1991. It has been a problem in South America and endemic for some time. We formed with Panama an alliance called the Panama U.S. Commission for the Eradication of Screwworm, the United States and Panama. And we operate a sterile fly production facility there in Pecora, Panama. And that is how we eradicated this pest from both Mexico, the United States, and Central America up to the Darien Gap, which was the biological barrier for this pest. New World Screwworm has made movement past the Darien Gap for the last 2.5 years, moved through Central America, and in November, it became a problem in Mexico, our neighbor there to the south. And Mexico had this parasite come in Chiapas, which is one of their southern states originally. And we closed the border to cattle, bison, and horses in November. I believe it was the 22nd. In order to try to protect our animal agriculture from incursion of this pest. This is not just a pest that affects cattle. It affects all warm-blooded animals, and some birds, people, and pets are at risk for this parasite. And what happens is you get what we call screwworm myiasis, and the fly will lay eggs, 200 to 300 at a time, around orifices of the body or wounds, the edges of wounds. Within 2 or 3 days, the eggs will mature into larvae that have hook-like mouth parts, and they will literally eat the living tissue. And these larvae do not eat dead tissue, they eat living tissue. And so if you have a newborn calf with an umbilicus, that's a prime site for this fly to lay eggs. And if you don't identify the problem, that calf could be dead in 2 to 3 days. So it means that you have to inspect your animals all the time. Well, what do you do or how do we get rid of this parasite? We can treat to prevent flies. We can also treat any wounds that we see. And we can do what we call sterile insect technique, which is disperse sterile male flies in the regions where we have these screwworms so that they will mate with the females who only mate once. And then we will not have eggs that will be laid to develop into larvae, and the populations will gradually be eliminated over time. So right now, we are working with Mexico to try to disperse sterile flies and try to control this harmful pest from moving into the United States. And happy to take any questions after that overview, Leanna.
So, my understanding of this issue is that one of our big problems right now is Mexico not moving as fast as they need to and not having enough sterile flies. So, can you kind of like go into where the problems we're facing now with it and how we're going to solve those problems and move forward with it?
Well, I think Mexico has a number of problems that are allowing this fly to migrate towards our border. Those problems are that their border with Guatemala there and all of Central America is infested, including Guatemala. Cattle that come into Mexico from Central America, of course, it is our understanding that they undergo mitigation measures to try to prevent screwworm from entering Mexico. However, there's a number of illegal cattle movements that move through this area. And, all it takes is a few illegal cattle to spread this pest further into Mexico. The way the country is constructed, there's an isthmus there, an area that narrows before you get into the states that border the United States. And our goal had been to keep this pest at a red line there on the isthmus. However, we were not able to do that because we had problems getting, there were bureaucratic obstacles to landing the planes that carry the sterile flies to be able to disperse those. Right now, we have overcome those obstacles and we are flying in 44 flights a week and dispersing 100 million of these sterile flies. Now, that is the maximum production for Pecora Panama. We can only produce 100 million of these pupa or flies a week. So we are putting down everything we have now in Mexico. We are currently not dispersing sterile flies in Central America. We had to cease that to get better control in Mexico. Some of the problems that they're having in Mexico are movement controls, controlling the movement of animals to prevent this fly from traveling on trucks or with animals within the country. We also are seeing problems with active surveillance. We have passive surveillance, and that means the Mexican producers are reporting the positive cases we have there, but unfortunately, the fly is oftentimes ahead of those cases in its movement. So, when we saw a positive case in Veracruz here recently in July, after we'd opened the border on July 7th again, we became concerned because that was only about 370 miles from our border. And that was only passive surveillance, meaning the fly could be ahead of that case. What we need is active surveillance, and that's fly traps with lures placed ahead of where you think the flies are to see if flies are indeed further ahead of where you're dispersing the sterile males, because we certainly want to be stopping the movement. We don't want to be behind the movement. So I think at this point, that's probably what you're talking about when you're talking about problems.
So, since we're kind of limited on our amount of sterile flies that we can produce right now, my understanding was that we're going to start construction on a sterile fly facility in Texas. Is that one of the approaches?
I think that's a goal. It certainly is. We're working to try to get funding, probably need about $300 million to do that. We have had the Secretary of Agriculture agree to set up a dispersal center for these sterile flies at near Mission, Texas, at Moore Airfield there. Now, that's the other situation is these flies are now being produced in Panama and Pecora. They can only travel a certain distance chilled and still remain viable and virulent, to be effective in the control measures. So we are moving a dispersal. We will move a dispersal center to that area. And then we hope to also start construction for a production center somewhere in the United States, most likely in the same area.
So this fly is moving fast, and since it can travel on any warm-blooded creature, it's really hard to keep track of it, even if we have the border closed down to livestock to like try to stop it. So do you think we're going to get it in the United States? If so, when and what is going to happen? What is going to be the fallout for both the cattle producers and the cattle market, not in the US and internationally in our relationship with consumers?
Lots of questions there, Leanna. I think those are questions that everybody has, and we more or less wish that we had a crystal ball to give all those answers to you. I think we're doing everything we can to keep this harmful pest out of the United States, but you are right. It can move on wildlife, and even though we might have the border closed, the Rio Grande is not a complete barrier to stray animals or wildlife crossing over into Texas. We are planning currently, and I think they're in the process this week, of putting fly traps along the border there in Texas to make sure that we detect anything before it actually becomes a problem in our livestock herd. We are working to do everything we can to be prepared. And I think we have groups of state animal health officials through the National Assembly, which is the group that they all belong to, a working group looking at how we might have domestic zoning, or how we could have possibly mitigation measures to move animals from infested states to free states within the United States should we get this. We're looking at also working with USDA and FDA to try to get products back on the market that could help to treat these cases as well, because we haven't had this disease since 1966, and a lot of those products are currently not on the market, and we need to get label approvals on products that would be effective but maybe aren't labeled for screwworm because that wasn't necessary to do when the drug was approved. So we are looking to try to reinforce our treatment options, reinforce our preparedness, talk more about biosecurity and movement controls, and how, if and when this comes to us, we will best be prepared to combat and defeat this pest.
So is there anything else about this topic that you think producers need to know before we move on?
Well, I think we've covered, the basics here, but I think that they need to realize that this is a foreign animal disease. It will be reportable to state animal health authorities if it does come in the state. So producers will need to report that to their veterinarian, to an accredited veterinarian, who will report that to the state animal health officials, who then report that to the federal animal health officials. I think that it probably will affect some trade that we have in live animals should the United States be infested with screwworm. Even if it is one or two states, some countries may not recognize regionalization with New World Screwworm. That will be something that our trade negotiators will have to work with. I think that we need to realize that biosecurity becomes more and more important as we battle these emerging diseases like the H5N1 in the dairy cattle. I think the dairy industry has had a wake-up call on biosecurity, and I think this may be our wake-up call on biosecurity as well. And the Beef Quality Assurance Program has a biosecurity template that producers can work with their veterinarians, extension agents, or BQA trainers to set up a biosecurity plan for their operation And then we have the Secure Beef Supply Plan, which can be found at securebeef.org. And it walks through what might be happening in a foreign animal disease situation as far as continuity of business, movement permits, and movement controls. So I think this is the time that everybody needs to start to prepare and think about these things. We have been very fortunate to have been free of major foreign animal diseases and diseases like this for many years. And we need to be forewarned, prepared, and forearmed to defeat this and continue to operate our businesses.
So New World Screwworm is something that's kind of more on our doorstep, but I know in Europe, I believe lumpy cow disease or something lumpy.
Lumpy skin disease is in France, and that's another disease. The other thing that is moving through the United States now is the Asian longhorn tick and Tyleria orientalis akita. I know in Kansas they recently reported seeing Tyleria orientalis akita, but I think those were some cattle that came from Virginia or from the East Coast where they have had this problem for a few years. This Asian longhorn tick did enter the United States, we think as early as 2010, was first found in New Jersey in 2016, 2017 in sheep, and for some time was really restricted to states on the East Coast. Now we see it in over 20 states. I think they may be almost at 24 right now with the District of Columbia. And it is a concern for us because Tyleria orientalis akita cost the Australian cattle industry millions of dollars. These animals are persistently infected many times, like with anaplasmosis. It's a bovine infectious anemia. We have abortions. We have animals that die, and then also production issues as well. So I think, there are diseases out there. The Tyleria orientalis akita is already here. We hope the lumpy skin will not be here. And then, of course, we hope that the big bad disease of all of them, foot and mouth disease, does not come here either. But biosecurity and preparedness are certainly key to preventing these diseases.
So over the past couple of months, we've heard stories of people sneaking things into the U.S., such as fungi that will devastate our crops. What's the level of concern of basically biosecurity terrorism effort from other countries and individuals, and what is the protocol in place to try to stop those?
Well, I think we rely upon our officials at the import-export markets. We rely on our Customs and Border Protection folks. We have met with them a number of times. We have supported legislation to enlarge the Beagle Brigade. These are the little beagles that are at the airports sniffing your luggage and all of the things that come into this country, looking for anything that is an agricultural product that might create a risk for U.S. agriculture. And I know that here in D.C., there is a very active Beagle Brigade at Dulles International Airport, and those little guys are finding things all the time. And we certainly support that work, and we try to do everything we can congressionally to make sure that those folks have the funding that they need to do the job to protect animal agriculture in the United States.
Since we have a new administration, have we seen that they are a lot more supportive of things like the Beagle Brigade and making sure that we protect our national security through our food security?
I think this administration has been supportive. I think we've been fortunate over the years that animal health and public health and national security are really bipartisan issues. And I think there's a lot of support for those issues. I know that we have had some plans come out for national security in agriculture. And I know that our Secretary of Agriculture is very committed to that issue as well.
Are there any other diseases that you are concerned about that maybe aren't quite as on people's radar, like foot and mouth is? Because that's the big one we're always talking about, but there's probably a million other ones that could affect us.
Well, I think there are a number of diseases that we have to be concerned about, and we try to decrease disease risk in our herds by improving overall animal health. We vaccinate against the diseases that we can vaccinate against. We give our animals good nutrition. We decrease the stress in handling. We decrease the stresses in transport. We try to do everything we can to keep our animals healthy. And I think that should be the goal of all of our producers is good management, a good relationship with your veterinarian, preventative health care, and biosecurity do a lot to protect your herd.
So going back to the biosecurity plan, you kind of went over where producers can find resources. Can you kind of go over what is expected from a biosecurity plan so producers kind of know like what they're getting themselves into essentially when they start this process and what is required of it and what is required of it to get my understanding is state approval or make it good enough so when something happens that the biosecurity plan allows you to have more flexibility during shutdowns and stuff like that.
Sure, Leanna. I think that those are good, all good questions. I know that the BQA has a manual that is sort of like a template, it's sort of like a workbook that you sit down with your veterinarian or with your extension agent or with a BQA trainer and work through who is going to be responsible for what on the farm as far as biosecurity, assigning responsibility, then making sure they had the necessary training to know what is a biosecurity risk and how would we mitigate that. You can make a map of your area and draw lines of separation for if we did have to have our farm, more or less closed off and protected against feed trucks that come in or go to other places, what would be our area where they could come and, and we would consider them to be clean, to come into that area, but not clean enough to come into our inner perimeter. We look at feedstuffs and how we can protect against problems with feedstuffs. We look at regular veterinary care. It's probably, I would say, 10 or 12-page manual, where you fill these things in. The Secure Beef Supply has a website that has a lot of good educational materials on it. I encourage everyone to watch some of the videos that we have on that securebeef.org site. I think this is something that we recently received a grant for Secure Beef Supply that allowed us to train additional folks to take this information out to producers in every state and to try to help, to strengthen our biosecurity plans or enhance the basic biosecurity plans for the case of a foreign animal disease where there would be movement controls. And I think that's a big issue for people to understand. How do we do permitted movements? How does that work through our state? Lots of questions and something that you don't learn overnight, but it is a work in progress and you strengthen it. First, you have to get a basic plan and then strengthen that.
For sure. I know that my state is kind of in a different, it's kind of in a predicament with it because of how much we have with public lands. And if we were to have a shutdown, what that would look like working with the Forest Service to keep animals in place for longer because it's necessary. And so I think that's kind of, we've come a long ways with that. I've gone through some training with that. And so I'm glad to see that we're getting kind of the public lands aspect kind of nailed down a little bit more. Because
that was a project that I believe went through the NADPREP grant procedure too. And I think it was the sheep industry and the beef cattle industry worked together on that project to come up with some biosecurity recommendations for public lands. There's also been work for livestock markets. I think the discussions have expanded beyond the individual farm to include some of the areas where risk of disease could be present.
So, if slash when, hopefully just the if, we do have a foreign animal disease, can you kind of go over the steps that we would take at the national level with stuff like the 72-hour shutdown and what, in general, that's kind of going to look like for us?
If, say, you had a cow on your farm that had vesicular lesions, which are sores, on the udder or near the coronary band of the hooves, that made you suspect that you might have a foreign animal disease, like, God forbid, FMD, you would call your veterinarian. Your veterinarian, if he or she agreed that this was a problem, and I think they probably would, because there are cases where it could be vesicular stomatitis and not a major issue like foot and mouth disease, they would notify your state animal health authorities, and they would notify the area veterinarian in charge from USDA APHIS, and they would send out a foreign animal disease diagnostician who would take the necessary samples to make the diagnosis of what your animal had. Meanwhile, your premises would be under a local quarantine with no animals coming in or going off the premises during the testing period. And they would test at a National Veterinary Services laboratory that's accredited and give you a result probably within 24 hours of what you were dealing with. And then if you were dealing, God forbid, with foot and mouth disease, then you would probably have a national movement shutdown for 72 hours while all the states could coordinate where this was, how broad was the problem, and how we were going to control movement and contain the disease.
So after the 72-hour shutdown, we kind of like are able to pinpoint the problem area or areas. I know there's different like levels of quarantine. Can you kind of go over like what those are and how many miles out each level is?
Well, they would create zones, which is what you're thinking of, and those zones would have a range in kilometers based on the risk. And there'd be a buffer zone and a control zone, and you would then have permitted movements in areas where you felt you were taking non-infected animals into non-infected areas. And those would have to be permitted movements. So most of your movements would require a permit. And if they are interstate, of course, those always require a certificate for veterinary inspection. So I think it becomes a situation where when you can freely move within a state, if you had areas in that state where there were control areas and buffer areas, and it would require permitted movements maybe to move in that state, whereas before you weren't going interstate, so it didn't require any kind of certification.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to share with producers around this topic?
Well, I think, again, I would share, go to our website, securebeef.org. There's a lot of information there on biosecurity that's enhanced for foreign animal diseases. Talks a lot about movement control, so they might better understand what permitted movements would look like. I would encourage all of them to become BQA certified and to get a basic biosecurity plan. I think the template that we have and the Beef Quality Assurance Program has been perfected and worked on for many years. I think it's much greater than it was 5 years ago as far as the degree of detail. And I think that I would encourage them to talk to their veterinarians about what they think would be the greatest risk for disease within their herd, as far as entry points and areas that they needed to monitor.
Okay, well, I am kind of out of questions.
Well, that's fine. It's been great talking with you, and I think we've touched on enough of the topics that you wanted to talk about that folks can know where they can go to get additional information. NCBA also has a website dedicated to New World Screwworm, which you can reach going on the beef.org site. And we also support a lot of the information that USDA APHIS has put on their website on New World Screwworm. Much of the information on their site deals with the international component in Central America and Mexico as well, if folks are interested in learning more about that. And then COPEG, the Panama U.S. Commission for the Eradication of Screwworm, has a website as well that you can just reach by Googling COPEG, COPPG. So I think lots of places to go to learn more and answer any specific questions that we may not have answered today in our discussion. Leanna, it's been a pleasure to talk with you today.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you as well. There's a lot of really good information, so I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening. We greatly appreciate it, and we hope to catch you guys next time. Thank you.